Okay, so the majority of the speakers here are people, let's say, from academia, who are also, let's say, politically engaged in the struggles, into building something, into changing things. But I think Sinan wouldn't describe himself like this. This is his main occupation. So he's an activist, an organizer. This is what he does. This is what he builds upon. But what is really interesting is he tries to reflect. He tries to think about it. He's not only, spontaneously trying to do what is possible, but he looks at his own practice. I think this is very important for activism, for advancing to political goals that we have set. So Sinan is based in Portugal, and he is one of the members of Climaximo. And one of the things that we invited him is his book with his colleague, All In Now, so All In and Now. And there's also a book presentation on Friday, which is, let's say, in addition to the summer school. But today he'll be also talking about the Climate Jobs campaign that they did at Climaximo. So, Sinan, please.
Thanks very much. Right, so this is the name of the talk. And this is a joke. This is what is on the website. I'm just joking about how not to do slides. So do interrupt me. First thing, do interrupt me directly. No microphone needed. Just speak over, and because it's recorded, I will repeat the question for everyone to hear as well. And then I can answer it as much as I can. If there is a specific question, something is not very clear, don't hesitate. Just maybe raise your hand if you're not on the front so that I can actually see that you're talking. But in the front, you can just, confused faces are good enough. So I am going to move on. This is my third slide. We are already on the third slide. So I want to tell you a few things about myself. So some of it Bostian already said. Another thing I think he didn't mention is that I actually have a job other than this that I'm doing. And it has been always like this, the political activity is, there is this alienated wage labor, and then there is the actual life, and so on. It's really, for those of you who are geeks of Marxology, it's like this 1840 whatever manuscripts say that your wage work cannot be your self-realization and things like that. So anyway, where I'm coming from. I think I'm coming from two places. One of them, some of you might remember, and the other one, some others might remember. So one of them is, somebody will have to remind me, there's this, Greta gave a talk somewhere, how dare you, where was that? It was in 2018 somewhere. How dare you do this, la la la, this whole image, and she became a meme as well as a leader in 2018 in some UN space, I think. So if you actually read the entire paragraph, well, it's a long text, but if you look at the entire paragraph, she says things like, it's written somewhere, it's written in the book actually. It says things like, how dare you come here and do this blah, 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 whereas we know that by the end of this meeting, no actual solutions will come, and we're not even close to achieving what is necessary, and so on. You remember all of this? Summit, yeah? Climate summit? Yeah, some UN climate summit. I think it was in Poland. I don't know. It was, no, it's before. It cannot be in Glasgow because it has to be in 2018. We don't care where it is, right? It's, but just wanted to recall. So the point is, everything she said about how dare you, you're lying to yourself, you're not up for the task, what you planned so far does not correspond to what is needed. All of these I took personally. Because she could be saying that to any of the organizing meetings that I participated in. Of course, she's talking to this elite and whatever, but I claim to, sometimes I come and say things like, certain things should happen, or we should do certain things, and this is bad, we have to solve it, and so on. And then I organize a lot of meetings, I'm participating in a lot of meetings, and she could be saying exactly the same. How dare you talk like blah, blah, but don't really have a plan of winning. So that's where I'm coming from. And the second place I'm coming from, there are two ways of telling the story. I will tell the Turkish one because, I don't know, it's a bit nicer maybe. In 2013, around this time actually, there was this urban transformation project. Somebody was going to do some shopping mall in the middle of Istanbul instead of a park. So end of May, I think some 40 people went there and camped to stop the machines. And of course, they were kicked out. Then they made a larger call to the campaign, and the next day, 70 people showed up. And they were kicked out. I mean, by kicked out, I mean police comes, pepper gas, and blah, blah, blah. The third day, 150 people showed up. And they were tear gassed again, and they had these tents, and the tents were burned. It was a very strange situation. And the day after, 2 million people showed up. And then we went back to the camp, back to the park. This is the time, if you remember, 2013 is also where the massive stuff happening in Brazil, and all of this is already fed by the Arab Spring, Occupy, blah, 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 all of that dynamics. So all of a sudden, we liberated the park. In a period of 1 month, the Turkish state says 8 million people participated in these campaigns, in these protests. Of 81 districts, in 80 of them, there was a mass protest. There are some stories. I was already in Portugal by then. I went to Istanbul, but there are some stories in Ankara where like our comrades were like actually guiding people to the parliament and see like they could actually see the parliament building. It was a very strange situation. In Istanbul, we were in the park. It's a massive area. I think one could easily say that up to 10,000 people were camping. There were a lot of people who were not camping, but would come during the day or come after work or come in the morning to bring some börek, you know, for some breakfast. And I was there. And it was very strange. So if you're there with some, like, of course it was really empowering for a lot of people. There was a cafe, there was a clinic, self-organized, there was a library, there's always a library in these spaces. And there was a platform, and people were talking. And I was a bit confused, because the government was preparing. He was in Morocco. He came back, and he started organizing rallies. And we were a bit confused about, like, okay, so the masses came. Now we are all together, you know, the class, whatever, like, this is the people. And in the platform, there was some conversation, and there was some internal meetings. I was a bit confused, but I was like, okay, fine. Like, people probably know what they're doing, right? Turns out they didn't. The government consolidated their powers, and then the police came, and they did the specific trick of coming on a Friday afternoon so that we would have battles in a terrain of, I think the size is like 5 times Ljubljana, the entire battle terrain. Istanbul is very big, but okay. So they did it on Friday so that everyone would come and they would still beat us up. And we had no plan, apparently. Right? Because I thought we had a plan, and somebody had a plan. So I came back from it. I mean, obviously the movement continued. There were neighborhood assemblies, and it transformed into different things and so on. The park is still a park. This was, 12 years ago. The government collapsed, and there was even some faction of it tried to do a coup, and so there is this whole political crisis that was produced by it, but we were not leading it. From that moment on, we were not leading it. And I was very confused. I went back to Portugal to participate in the anti-austerity movement as well. I realized we don't know what we're doing. And that we are not allowed that. We are not allowed to not have proper victory plans. And so that's where I'm coming from. So I'm coming from a place of like actual real life experience. It's not like what we have to do and something, but it's more like it's something that I have to be doing. Like this is what like things that keep me awake at night, and in the morning I start working on them. So the one thing I discovered is that there is this two sets of information that we deep down we are aware of, but we are in denial of both of them. So climate crisis gives us information. This information is about urgency. It's about that things have to change very, very quickly. We probably passed on 0.5. I mean, we passed last year, but also in the long term, we passed on 0.5. That means massive death, billions of people dislocated within global north, but also just yesterday people died. You know, there was all these stories of the heat wave now. So this is really massive, like global scale concentration camp for the masses. It also gives us an information about. It also has an emotional information. It's about anxiety, and it's about anguish. It's about this like deep. It's not just a lot of things have to change, but it really looks very difficult to achieve it, particularly because of the context in which we live today. So it also comes with emotional information. Like it's really tough to handle. So it's very hard information to hold, right? It's very heavy. Then there is the second information, which a lot of speakers here already talked about, but I think my experience is that people who engage with climate crisis seriously, they come to this conclusion just the same, which is that we have to, the change, you know, a lot of things have to change very quick. Those a lot of things are really a lot of things. And it implies systemic change, like actual ways of operating in, you know, not only in economy, but also in the society and so on. A lot of things have to change. That we will need masses to do that. So we have to understand what class looks like and what class composition is today. And we have to engage with all of that conversation. And that there is an enemy class. So people are very well aware of this. People are coming up with this idea. They don't need theory. You just need to pay attention. And the third information that comes from the capitalism side is that you can only win it if you can only win this if you do this globally. So all of a sudden, you know, like the whole idea of neighborhood, our communities, like even our like nation states and so on, they are not adequate terrains of ambition. That ambition itself is denialist. That is not where the solution lies. And we are aware of all of these things. So the problem is, these are two very heavy sets of information. So what I have seen so far is that people try to hold only one of them. Because that's the only way of like, it's a cognitive dissonance, but that's probably the only way of like actually going to sleep at night. So the question is, how can we do this? How can we hold both of these informations in our strategies, in our politics, in our emotions, in our bodies? How can this make sense to us, right? Because this is a world that, we are trying to make sense of the world. So this is where I'm coming from. Which means if you're not coming from there, the remaining of the talk will be a bit like, okay, somebody's talking. And if it touches you, please come back and talk to me, because I'm not going to present any theoretical or abstract. I'm going to tell you what I see. And if it resonates with you, then maybe we can do something about it. And so, basically what I wanted to say for this opening is that this is either your problem or not, right? This is my problem. These are my problems from Turkey with Greta and so on. It's either your problem or not. And I will give you a lot of answers to those problems just now in the following half an hour. And of course, if these are not your problems, then one of us is in the wrong room, right? Which is fine. It happens. We didn't fully agree to be in the same place, so that's okay. So I just wanted to situate ourselves, so like, what are we talking about? So I want to start with saying there's a book. We call it a book because it physically looks like a book. It's more like a recruitment talk. The script is written. There are some copies downstairs. This is where I'm coming from also. And because it's a recruitment talk, a book doesn't recruit you to anything, right? But this conversation, as well as the book, is about recruiting you to a commitment between each other to try to hold these both informations at once. So I will tell you today, in this talk, I will tell you 2 half things and 2 actual things. I'm just going to write this down. So one is that the issue that we are trying to solve is that we have to dismantle capitalism in the short term, and we need a theory of change. Like, we need a way of doing this, actual way of doing this, as in measurable way of doing this, refutable ways of doing this, right? Disprovable ways of doing this. So how can we hold both of these informations, and what is an organizational model that can do that? So that's first question, which is basically what I said in the beginning: anxiety, frustration, panic. So that's the first information. Because if you say, what's your plan to do that? We are supposed to be answering this question. And that question has to be answered in an accountable way, like as in, here's my answer, here's what I'm supposed to achieve in a year, here's what I'm supposed to achieve in a month, and here's what I'm supposed to do next week. So basically we are fucked, right? So that's the first statement. Then the second statement is how these 2 things interact. I think it was really nice to have the first talk in the beginning of like how the relationship between climate and crises function, capitalism and crises. So the other information is about how can we, this is wrong, how can we embed the climate information into the conversation of anti-capitalism, blah, blah, blah. And also, how can we collect the class information embedded in the theory and make sense of it in class politics? And then I'll just give you an example of all of these things. So this is the plan. And because I cannot keep a slide here and move on somewhere else, that's a slide. Right. Cool. So the first half thing is you can only answer questions if you have a playground to be curious about them, right? If you have frameworks in your head that can help you explore it, because otherwise, if it's too big, the solution is you will have to run away from it at some point. So one thing that we are arguing, and this is the first half thing that I want to say, is that we situate ourselves in a larger movement ecosystem that corresponds to complexity with complexity. So the first statement is, we really have to do everything. We have to bet on everything. And we have to, do mass agitation. We also have to take care of crisis situations. We have to also delegitimize the system. We have to do all of those things, and we have to invest in all of those things. But we, like individually, we cannot organize the totality by definition, right? Because it doesn't make sense. So we have to make sure that some of us are doing some of the things and others are doing the other thing, both in a way that makes sense and with intentionality. So we need a framework, a playground. We need an intentional relationship between these people that are doing other things. And we need to understand what we mean by diversity in our movements. So there is this concept of movement ecology, social movement ecology, and so on. I really like this word, not because ecology is like environment and whatever, but more like a way of thinking about ourselves. Because everyone that I know of who are actually engaging in ecological work, or earth care work, I don't know, there are fancy words for it. They are very intentional about diversity. They look at specific things and they're like, I don't want this in diversity. Doesn't make sense. I want this diversity, but I don't want them to talk to each other, so they have to be separate. They have a relationship that can feed each other, so they should be close to each other. If there are no connections, you build connections. If there are antagonistic connections, you want to separate them, and so on. So intentional relationships here. And so what we do is to improve. Why do I have a next slide? So when I talk about these things of like, oh, capitalism, I mean, all of us, when we talk about these things like climate and as like entire economy is referred, and then when you talk about capitalism, there's global, blah, blah, blah. What I hear a lot is that it's very complex. If somebody tells you something is complex, what they're actually meaning is, I don't want to talk about it. But there's a different way of doing it, like, which means my answer has to be as complex, right? So this is what we are trying to achieve with the book. Understanding that we have to find a complex way of thinking in a way that harvests diversity and acknowledge convergences, divergences, see if they are useful, and to what extent, and be intentional about all of these things. So this kind of thinking produces movement-level interventions, looking at the entire image like this. So different things people are doing. This is like a screenshot from the book, but I'm not going to talk about the book. So this is the first half thing I wanted to say. If you want to know more about this part, this Friday at 5, so after the summer school, still here, there's going to be some, it's not a presentation, it's like a workshop of some sorts that we're going to do. So if you want to know more, talk to me. Also, be here at 5. Now, the second half thing that I want to say is apparently that thing, which is how can we do climate-informed class politics. So there's information in the climate crisis that is distinct from any other thing that we have dealt with, which is deadline. This is really, really important to understand, like actual system change, like all of these things should happen, blah, blah, blah. If you take the climate information as is, you discover, oh wait, I have to do these things in the following 5 years, because that changes qualitatively what the task is. So that is the information that is hidden in that statement. And there are ways of avoiding this. Because as I said, like in the beginning, like the only cognitive, emotional, physical way of holding these things, you only hold one of them, right? You cannot hold both of them because they're already, holding one of them is already sending people to depression. How can you hold both of them, and how can you avoid holding both of them? So one way, we found in our actual like day-to-day conversations, we discovered 4 ways in which we avoid these things. And these are tendencies in the sense that I am doing them. I'm complaining about other people, of course. I'm also complaining about myself, but these are things that I'm doing. So let me go one by one. One way of doing it is insisting too much on the climate part as a policy approach instead of going to the actual system change approach, right? So, and there, of course, the question is, and this is very typical. This is very typical in the climate movement somehow, but I found it's also very typical in the housing movement recently, which is, so the first one, the question is, if you do everything you said, what does it give us? What's your success like? Is that a reasonable success? Is that success acceptable? Given the climate crisis, given the deadlines, given capitalism, given all of that, is that a reasonable thing? So when people tell me, for instance, in the Extinction Rebellion in the Netherlands, they're like, oh, in 2 years we're going to end fossil fuel subsidies. I'm like, have you read any of the climate reports? Like that's 4 degrees. If we do that, if that is our ambition, then we are going to 4 degrees. So that doesn't make any sense, right? But that's a way of avoiding the actual deeper discussion. Another way is what some people sometimes call right deviation. It's a technical term. Don't worry about it. It's that you go to the masses. You're like, because I need the masses, so I have to find ways of engaging the masses. And people do this in a variety of ways. They go to workers. They go to communities. Some people do like energy poverty stuff, public transport stuff, blah, blah, blah. The point here is that of course you have to do those things, right? But as you do it, you discover in time that you can't really lie to people for too long about what is actually needed. And that really matters, because the moment you start lying, then you also start lying to yourself because that's the only way of keeping the talking points running, right? Your mobilization talks have to embed, you physically embed it, so you rationalize it yourself, right? So that's another problem. The third one, what did I write here? Life deviation, fighting ghosts. So, which is, you get the climate information, but you go all the way to capitalism and like, the problem is exchange value or profit maximization. And so everything that fits into that category is wrong. And then you're fighting some concept that doesn't exist, right? Which is this green capitalism. It's a thing, it doesn't exist, right? The people that are talking about these things with me are people that are actually avoiding the problem. Because if you look at the this is really trivial stuff. Oil demand is increasing, gas demand is increasing, coal demand is increasing, investment in all of these things are increasing. I'm not saying there is no such thing as investments that are framed as green capitalism. I'm saying as a structural thing to fight, that thing does not exist. People are doing business. People are also doing business in private healthcare sector or in mining or whatever. They are doing all of those things. That's not green capitalism. We live in fossil capitalism, and it's an apparatus that is growing currently. And by currently, I mean the last 150 years. So that is a way of avoiding, because then you're like, oh, I'm going to talk about how bad electric cars are, as if the other cars are diminishing, right? So it doesn't make any sense. It's really a cognitive dissonance. And the fourth one that I want to talk about is some sort of collapsism. This is really typical of I think Western European and maybe a little bit of US people are also doing this. Some sort of, oh, we failed. 1.5 is dead, 2 degrees is dead, whatever number, any other now, 2.3 is dead. I don't know what is dead. But they like, something is dead, now you have to do adaptation. So, you can only say things like this to yourself if you first say yourself, I am entitled to define when we fail. So when you say something like this, you're like, obviously, I'm not going to consult people in Sudan who are currently passing through a climate collapse. I'm not going to consult the people in Syria who are currently passing through climate collapse. But I'm going to define that here now, in this room, with this air conditioning, in this beautiful environment, that we failed. Because I can say this. I can say this only because I am activating some privilege, right? It doesn't really make sense that this happened. It just makes me comfortable to say it, because then I'm not accountable anymore. So these are 4 ways that we discovered that are really, really problematic. I'm not going to talk about any of this. This was the half point. And, oops. Yeah, so the way to solve it is if you keep yourself rooted in reality, which means are emissions decreasing? Go ahead. Organizers. I'm referring to myself. Like, how am I talking to I look at the mirror. Okay, I'm not looking at the mirror. I'm looking at the news. I don't know, some people know. I think there are like 400 forest fires in Turkey now. Can somebody correct me? Is it more or less like that? 400? Yeah. There are 400 forest fires. I look at the news, then I look at the mirror. What is it that I'm telling to myself before going out of that? So that is the basic level. So this is why I started by saying, like, I come from this responsibility place of, like, given all the privileges that I also have, right, what am I doing with all of these resources that the society embedded in me? Does that answer, more or less? At least for the moment, right? So, okay, how can we handle this? We found a few ways of taking care of these things, which are these rooted in reality, rooted in class struggle, but also deeply anchored in honesty and the anxiety. They are both relevant things, and they are actual things that we can harvest. If you want to know more about these things, there will be a next panel. But now let's move on to the actual things that I want to say. So the actual thing I wanted to say was, how can I embed capitalism into climate, right? Class-informed climate politics, blah, blah, blah. So climate has a deeper and broader radicalization pipeline than many of the other things, because the moment you start thinking about these things and actually doing stuff about these things, you immediately meet the big guys, right? You immediately meet not only at government level, but also at economic level, the big enemies, the people that are dependent on capitalism. And you reach fossil capital. And this also, I saw this happening really with 15-year-olds from 2018 to 2019. They immediately reached this conclusion without any training. We didn't give political training to these people. They were just told, emissions have to reduce, what are we going to do? Like, there is a natural line from Greta in 2018 to Greta in Gaza. That line is natural. Go ahead. Nice. I mean, in 2019, we had the Fridays for Future launched by Greta, so maybe she didn't say the blah blah one, but she did the how dare you one into somewhere before that, because I remember using the slides in schools. But thanks. So the correction is, the blah blah part happened in Glasgow. She was, this was in later. So there are two ways of avoiding this kind of information. And one of them is, if you embed too much of capitalism into the climate conversation, then it looks like anything that you do that doesn't dismantle capitalism is not relevant to do, right? So if not capitalism altogether, then it's not good enough. So this is a totality view, right? This is like either everything or nothing, which is also a comfortable position, because everything doesn't exist as an entity, so we kind of unhook ourselves. And the second one is, if we want to get popular support, we have to do some sort of campaigns that actually fit to the immediate needs of the people, so that we can build this movement, the class stuff, right? But then we might miss the deadline. So this is also connected to the other side that I was saying about, like, the fossil fuel subsidies and so on. So you might be doing agitation in a way that gives you, in the ideal scenario, a revolution in 2039, and that's just too late. So there's also a way of avoiding all of this like that. So here's the next slide. So the way to handle these things, okay. So instead, I think the right way to approach these escapisms is that you find ways of being useful that open up new opportunities and give more power to you for the next round, right? So that's what I'm going to talk about afterwards. But I think this might be a very good moment to give you a break. This is me talking a lot. I want to give you a break. And I suggest that talk in pairs about, like, does this resonate with you at all? Does that make sense? In pairs, I'm just going to give you 10 minutes to talk about this. Like, is this at all relevant? Does it, like, do you have any doubts? Maybe, because most of the questions that are coming in these kind of spaces, you could actually just ask the guy next to you, and like, you could come up with the answer together. So I'm just going to give you 5 minutes to talk in pairs about so far. So we came until here. We came until here, if this makes sense to you. So I'll just shut up now for 5 minutes, and then I'll call back again. Does that make sense? Cool. Thanks for the collaboration, for people who helped me out with this. So I was hoping to get some questions now, but I think that's going to kind of disturb the dynamics. But there was a question, right? It's really... No, I'm wondering in terms of, like, dinner, lunchtime and so on, but okay, let's not get comments at this point. And let's get some clarification stuff so that we clean up and then move on. There is a Q&A at the end. This isn't some sort of fake trap that I put you in. But if there is like specific stuff, like I just didn't understand, like we couldn't figure this out or something, I'm happy to hear. Does that, you're gonna say? Okay. Tell me. No, thank you. I had my coffee. Thank you. Okay, cool. All right. So, any other things that we could resolve? So there's one over there. Tell me, because if I can repeat it, right? Right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I said apparently something like fostering eco-anxiety, and I mean the eco-anxiety stuff that we're talking about, this psychosocial effect and so on. What do I mean by why do I use fostering? So your body is telling you something. That's information. The fact that your body is telling you something is information. And also, your body is right. We are supposed to be anxious, right? So that's what I mean by it. I mean that we have to understand that that is useful information that can produce results, that can have meaning. So when I say fostering, I don't mean like if people are not anxious, make them anxious, but more like if people are anxious, that's the right place to be. There was another one. You wanted to say something? Okay, but give me the one that I can wrap up very quick. And then at the end... But I repeat all the time, no?
I can give her, but...
That's going to be a lot of logistics. Tell me. Yeah. Yeah. Right, but we will make it very quick, right? Thank you.
How do you reconcile science and the understanding of facts with emotional?
Cool. So the question is, how do we reconcile, let's say, scientific facts and the emotional response, or basically, how can you relate to facts and their meanings, right? So I think this is the entire talk. Like I'm just saying, that is the only way of receiving information, right? If you only understand the information if you are if you embed the meaning into you. So this is why I'm like fostering anxiety and things like that. So the scientific, I don't know what is scientific like. There is a lot of Western ways of doing science, which is like data. And then as long as we produce more data, then we get a better career, apparently. What I'm saying is something is only information if you're emotionally connected to it. Otherwise, it's not information yet. So I think this is also where you're coming from, probably. But like, so this is exactly why when we figure these things out, we also have to make sense of ourselves in this context that we live in. So how can we make sense of our lives in a world that doesn't make sense? And I'll keep it here because that actually is a good transition to the next, but there will be, hopefully, if I don't screw up this part, I have what, how many, half an hour later it will end, yeah? Yes, okay, cool, that's okay. So I'm going to tell you something very concrete that we did, which was called a climate jobs campaign, which is actual application of these kind of things and trying to solve these issues. So a lot of people, in order to do class-informed climate politics, they look at trade unions and they look at industrial workers. And there are reasons for people to do this. So they do it for the trade unions because they have organized social power, they have a large membership, so they can influence basically the other people. They have some negotiation capacity, they consolidated their victory, so they can actually push for change. We can involve masses if we get support from trade unions, which is what some people say. And eventually, of course, they have the power and the right to strike in many contexts, and so they have some sort of disruptive capacity in the system. So this is some of the things that people tell each other. Activists say, oh, we have to go to the workers or whatever, trade unions. These are some of the things that people have in mind. We also had these things in mind. And then some people go to industrial workers. These may or may not be unionized. And they, of course, have a very strong disruptive capacity. So when that stops, a lot of other things also stop. Some people want to go to them because they are frontline of climate policy. So if like stuff that we heard yesterday, Lucas Plan or GKP, like things like this actually being on the front lines. But it can also be the opposite, as in there can be antagonisms because, losing jobs, the just transition stuff, blah, 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 which means that they can actually produce barrier to what we wanted to say in one form or another. And this antagonism can be latent, as in maybe they're not saying anything, but it can also be active, which happened, for instance, in Germany. And then eventually, of course, talking with people that work in these areas give you a lot of narrative capability. So you tell good stories with it, which is what JKPN actually is doing nowadays. It's like, hi, I am this guy doing this thing, and I actually want to do this other socially useful thing, right? So there are the reasons that some people look at industrial workers, and we also thought, okay, this is reasonable. We should do this. And we discovered that there was already a campaign called the Climate Jobs Campaign. So it's a campaign that exists. This is a story that I will tell you like very briefly of 10 years of specific activity. The campaign existed in other countries as well, different degrees, different times, and there is a definition. I mean, the campaigners came up with a definition. They said, we are demanding new jobs, so not like some sort of rebranding of existing stuff, which is what the green economy does a lot. We want public sector jobs, which is what a lot of people said about like commodification stuff and socially useful stuff. We are talking about jobs that cut emissions directly, because they are climate jobs and not just good jobs or important stuff. And one of the principles was that anyone who has to leave their job in their current situation should have training and job priority at the end. So this was the definition. And we launched it in 2015-16. And by 2023, I think the campaign was kind of at the end of its cycle. So then we started reflecting on it. And we were also part of, so myself and another comrade, we were part of the Global Climate Jobs Network. So those people up there, they were talking to each other more than monthly. And we would organize like joint events, conferences, and things like that, as well as like visits to understand what's going on. So this is the actual real life experience that I'm bringing to you. Like this is some sort of 200 events and maybe 500 meetings with variety of whatever, and then other people doing the same things and bringing it. So it's really empirical stuff that I want to give. We thought that there were some strengths to the campaign. And then we tested them. So we had some hypotheses in our mind of why this would work. And we were paying a lot of attention of whether this would work or not, because if it is not working, then we are lying to ourselves, right? So it's very much very basic accountability work. So one of them is that we thought, there is this statement, end of the world, end of the month, it's the same fight. This is a banner that was lifted, that was raised in many places, but also in yellow vests. When we said this, and when we actually worked with this framework, we did not get engagement. And we did not get commitment. When we said this to workers, to unions, it gave us support because it meant that we were not antagonistic to each other. So they understood that we were on the same side. But it did not produce, in any of the countries that I'm aware of, it did not produce enthusiasm. Oh, wow, thank you very much. So another assumption that we had is that by doing this campaign, we would leave this environmentalist bubble of, NGOs, middle class, and what's it called, professional managerial club, I don't know. So this bubble that you're all aware of because we are all part of it. We thought we would leave this. It didn't work. And this is really important feedback. It actually failed completely because, very specifically because NGOs did not want to leave it for class reasons. They understood that they did not want mass engagement, but not because they don't believe in mass engagement, but it's because they don't believe in the masses in the first place. And this was really interesting. The moment we actually did this step forward, the NGOs remained, and we were like, okay, now we are leftists all of a sudden. So the bridge was never built. Like, we swam the river, basically. And this is really important feedback also, and this happened in almost all cases of climate jobs campaign. Another thing that we noticed is that we thought, if we give people something to fight for instead of something to fight against, this will bring a vision and we will gather a lot of people together and so on. Like, instead of just no new oil project, or I don't know, against privatization, we would say, here's a worldview, right? There is no empirical reason to think that positive messaging mobilizes more people to the street. And this is really important. Like, I have been checking this for a very long time. There is no empirical reason to believe in this. And we didn't produce any either. We started with this belief. I don't believe it anymore. We have this idea that this would mobilize more people, but we don't have empirical reason to believe in this. Typically, a lot of people come to the street if they say, enough is enough. So this is really interesting that we tested this and we didn't produce any reason. Some others might, but we didn't. And another one is that we thought we could address the false dilemma between climate and environment, or climate and jobs and blah blah, all of that. So this is a false dilemma. You don't have to lose your job. You don't have to lose your income, or your sustenance and so on. This is said a lot in the by leftists. It's not true. The dilemma is only false after the transformation. Currently, if you are actually working with actual people, it does mean worse working conditions for them at that point. So they only align with you by the time you want to win, but not before. And this is really also very important because we want to believe in this, but it doesn't correspond to actual strategic steps. Obviously, it serves for political training. Like, among the people that agree with the climate jobs campaign, it was a useful tool to approach this, but it did not produce strategic results for us. Because it is a real dilemma. In real life, those people who signed the contract in 1970, 1980, those contracts don't exist and they know it. Even if they get a job in the renewable energy, those contracts disappeared. And they know, like, if next year they have to go to a different job, they're not getting the same contract. That's not an option at the moment. So at this moment, this wasn't a useful tool. Why am I doing this with this? Okay. Yeah, so these are some of the hypotheses. We had a total of 13 of them. There is an article. Just gave you some appetizer. Now, I also want to tell you a little bit about movement level, what we wanted to achieve with this. Because as we were doing this, we were also doing climate action. We were doing climate camps. We were doing direct action. We were doing frontline stuff, campaigning, and so on. So by doing climate jobs campaign, we thought we can engage with the institutional capability. Meaning, we can consolidate victories, we can create structures that can maintain this movement, and that can feed this movement. In our case, in Portugal, which doesn't have to apply everywhere, we won that climate jobs is part of the climate law. So there's a statement that says state is supposed to provide climate jobs. I don't know why we won this, but we did. But we failed in getting any political party or any large structure behind this banner. Nobody raised this flag and say, let's go, right? Like this kind of Ocasio-Cortez moment. Didn't happen. We failed. It might be just simply our failure. The second thing is that you can aim at some narrative capability by saying, I have the solutions. This worked pretty well. Fridays for Future, even in 2019, they had the climate jobs banner in the first protest. So the biggest biggest climate protests in Portugal, they were immediately not only political, but also had this narrative capability of like, who is to blame, what does a solution look like? So the stuff that Lorenzo was saying, like decommodification and so on, all of this was embedded in the narrative. So we managed to do it a bit better, I think. And finally, no, there's something else I want to say. We also produced a lot of reports. Like actually, we wrote down that in Portugal, 200,000 new jobs can cut emissions by 90% by 2030. So we know how to do this. And this really helps. It doesn't help you to win, but it does help you to hold ground. And we thought we could engage with organized labor from carbon-intensive sectors. That didn't happen. I mean, 8 years of attempt. When I say it didn't happen, it means like it's really, really hard. There is a lot of entrenched interest and entrenched culture in there. I'm not going to go into detail because it's specific, because union structures in general are very specific in every country. We had our own ways. In other places, there were other things. What's the question? No. Sorry for pointing. Yeah, so this is some feedback. Now I want to tell you a few lessons. Meaning. So going back. Go ahead.
Can I have a question? Did you engage more with the trade union officialdom, like the leaders, the professionals, or let's say rank and file?
The question is if we engaged more with the union structure or with the base, with the membership. That's a spoiler for my next slide. So going back here, there are these are legitimate reasons to do this, and maybe some of you, I heard at least some people are interested in doing this or are already doing this. So I want to bring you some lessons that we think are a bit more generalizable. So the first one, this I said already. Cool, I'm actually going over. So the first lesson is that if you don't win the climate argument, you cannot win the ambition argument. It just doesn't work. And the moment you give up the ambition argument, you already gave up the entire project. Which means you stop being able to sleep at night. So this is really important. Somebody has to constantly push for climate emergency as is, like deadlines, 2 years, 5 years, we have to win. If you don't push for this, you can win logos, you don't win politics. So this is very hard to digest for someone who did this for 8 years and come to this conclusion. Like, this is very defeatist position for myself, right? Like, I'm aware of what I'm saying. There's a question? So in terms of what needs to change when, right? So the first part, which means basically for all purposes, climate crisis tells me, 2 degrees tells me, entire Europe should have 0 emissions by 2030. This is 2 degrees statement. This statement, if the previous speakers are correct, means dismantling capitalism in the following couple of years, at least in Europe. So that is the discussion that we want to have, like what are we trying to achieve and so on. We can only have this discussion honestly if we are pushing for the climate emergency argument, if somebody is pushing. I'm not saying you have to be pushing it, but somebody in the movement has to be pushing it. So this is one. This is one. So basically, there is a difference. People talk about this of negotiation politics and transformative politics or something like this for unionism or in general for NGOs or something like. Are you trying to co-manage? Are you trying to negotiate with power holders, or are you trying to transform the rules of the game, right? You can only go to the rules of the game if you have the emergency argument with you. The second lesson And this is really crucial for if you actually want to work with the workers in emitting sectors. There is no transition for unions. For the workers, there might be. For the companies, there is, because Ursula wrote it. Ursula says, if you had this profit, I will give you this profit later. It's for the companies. For the workers, you might win something. The unions know that there is no way, there is no transition from a coal mine workers union into something else. That structure will disappear. And they know this. And it means the union delegates that have collected all this experience and know-how and resources, they will all go to garbage because they are not applicable in most of the cases. They cannot be carried over from sector to sector. Everything that they won will be lost. So if they have a collective agreement, if you have a negotiation rights and so on, like if they gathered 500 people in a refinery, that means 500 people together holding power. And what typically middle-class people are suggesting is we're going to take these 500 people, we will divide them into 100 small groups, and they will all go and build power, solar power, whatever, something, photovoltaic. From a union perspective, it means you just want to destroy my power. And this is factually true. This is what you are trying to achieve. And obviously, for the very practical perspective, so the union will disappear. The employees are not, there's no transition. And they are aware of this. And we have to know how to handle this information. In some cases, like transport or electricity, it might be a bit better. But for actual like fossil fuel extraction, mining, refinery, and so on, this is really complicated conversation. And you cannot avoid this conversation. Because just transition is an abstract word. In reality, it's not that trivial. Another one is what Bostian asked about with whom. What when we say talk to workers, what does that mean? It means you have to find the sweet spot between talking to whoever represents the workers, meaning there are people that the workers trust, but then there are also the actual workers. And that trust, as any other trust in any other relationship we have, that trust is contingent. It's full of contradictions, but it's still there. People do trust their union delegates, and they do trust their union structure. This is why they march with them. This is why they strike with them. This is because, they get legal support, they get solidarity, they get all of these things. So it's very hard to find where you can find this moment of transformation. We failed in this. We did both, and we failed. I don't know how to do it, but it's just me who doesn't know. And it's not at all trivial. I don't know how. I actually don't know. But there is one thing I know. Okay, sorry. Going back. What I learned from the cases in France, in Canada, in Norway, and in South Africa, and in the UK, is that the campaign only works if there are workers from those unions inside the campaign, not delegates, actual workers, like the rank and file inside the campaign. Which doesn't mean you are talking to those workers later on, but if there is somebody, some people who are your activists, campaign activists, is the only solution. If you don't have them, don't do it. It's not worth it. You're not gonna be able to navigate the structure. The fourth lesson, and this I think is really interesting, is the fact that we were able to write down exactly what needs to happen, as in, we were capable of saying, we need a total of 80,000 jobs in public transport in order to get zero emissions in mobility. And these 80,000 people in Portugal, half of it will do this, another quarter will do this, and so on. The fact that we were engaging with this is empowering. And it is an essential part because it's a very interesting radicalization tool, and it's also very interesting political training. Because you can constantly contrast with existing policy, and you can always show, you don't just say, I'm against that policy, I'm saying, that policy is against what I defend, which is this report, right? It helps you build capacity, policy capacity. And the fact that we know what needs to happen exactly also is a radicalization pipeline. And by radicalization, I mean going to the roots pipeline, right? That's the idea. Radical comes from the roots in. So it takes people faster to the root cause. So these are four. So basically, this is what we did. Wrapping up. If you want to do this, then you have to handle these issues, like how to hold both of those information. And here's one example of how we handle it. So this is where I will shut up. Yes, and we can get some questions maybe. Let me think.